It was New Orleans, picture it. It was at the Rawhide. I walked in a starched linen shirt, starched shorts, khaki, and flip-flops. And I walked in around 10 p.m. and I left around 6 a.m. Missing a flip-flop and my shirt. It was truly one of those moments where when you walk into a bar, I had just come out, and my friends thought it would be funny if I went to the Rawhide. So they opened the door, I walked in, they closed the door, and I stayed outside because they thought I'd come screaming, running out. 10 minutes later, when I did not run back outside, they came in searching for me, and I was actually, at that point, in the back room, and being very well educated, with the pool table back there. And they weren't playing pool. They were playing maybe a version of pool, but that was really my first introduction. You know, I've always said that when I entered the community, it really was not because of the good work that we do. It was not the fundraising. It was purity sex. And I fell in love with it at that point. And then Hurricane Katrina hit a few years later, and I moved to Dallas, and then that's when I saw a whole nother side of our community. Never letting go of the sex, of course. And that's when I grew more into the community as a whole, that there was something outside of, something to do in between all the sex. That's when I always said when I was 40 I would run for a title, and I don't know why 40, I just picked 40, sounded like a good round number. And so I ran for a title, and no one really knew who I was. And then Dallas Eagle happened, and then I went to Mr. Texas Leather, and then that happened, and then of course IML happened. And I haven't looked back. And what's been incredible as far as me as a journey is I look at the guy who walked into the Rawhide the first time, literally in a linen shirt, a starched linen shirt, high, heavy starch, by the way. And the men that were there at the time welcomed me. I mean, yeah, I was fresh meat, but come on. But they welcomed me. And that's why when Mark Frazier came to me about the Dallas Eagle, buying into it 5 years ago, Lord, it's been 5 years, that we continue to promote that. And then through the Eagle Outposts, when we have that group of guys come in and they're in their polo shirts and their khaki pants, and they're looking at stuff pointing, and they're going, what does that do? What does that do? And it's like, God, I remember being in those shoes, or those flip-flops. And knowing that we have that open door policy where everyone's welcome, because that person that may walk in there may be our next title holder. That person that walks in there, even if they're not a title holder, they may be that next person that we look at for guidance in our community. And if it can happen to me, it can happen to anyone. And that's what I love about our community is that we are welcoming. And we're not saying, you need to go away with your polo shirt. So that's how I started, with a very heavily starched linen shirt.
Actually, somewhat similarly to Jeff, mine started in New Orleans as well. I went to Southern Decadence for the first time in 2011. Yeah. So mostly it was rawhide. It wasn't quite leather at the time, but I did make it over to the Phoenix. There was a pretty good gathering of leathermen there, and obviously sex happened a lot. But I felt very welcomed by them as a group. I definitely wasn't in a starch shirt. Also obviously, I didn't really have any leathers at the time. I was still kind of still new, so, the whole pretty boy attire, all that crap. And but I mean, they welcomed me similarly, and it left an impression with me that kind of stuck with me for a while. And then I went to my first leather event, Mr. Texas Leather, in 2012, and that kind of got me into it a little bit further. And then I went to my first IML in May, and then that's when I knew that I definitely wanted to be a part of this community, because I got to see like kind of the whole picture. And since then, I've just been kind of getting involved in Sage and kind of helping out other people's events and things like that. And it's been a place where, because I was more in the bear scene before this, and I never really felt welcomed in that scene, versus the leather scene where I immediately felt welcome right away. And that's just, I mean, related back to diversity. I think that's kind of where the leather community has been so far ahead of everyone else. So that's kind of what got me into it, and the sex.
Krista?
Well, the sex definitely helps. I was born and raised in Las Vegas, and my mother's gay, and so I was raised in a situation with a lot of tolerance for other people and other beliefs. So I got into swinging when I was really, really young, and I remember thinking, oh yeah, those leather people are really crazy. I'm not going to get into that. I'm just totally not going to get into that because I'm so scared of it. Well, and here I am. I moved to San Antonio, and I was in a poly family at the time, and my husband told my now husband that I was interested in getting into performing in one of his fetish events, because we had gone to a fetish event, and I thought it was the funnest thing in the world. It just blew my mind. I was like, oh my God, I'm home. This is it. This is the shit. I'm definitely home. And so my husband went up to Steve and said, hey, my wife wants to get involved in this. And Steve, well, okay, that's kind of strange, but he didn't understand the poly dynamic. Next thing you know, I'm totally involved in the fetish scene, helping Steve with his events, helping Temple of Flesh, and as soon as I got involved in that, then we started talking about starting SASM. And I was involved from the very beginning, planning meetings for actually organizing SASM and trying to get it off the ground here in San Antonio. And I wondered whether it would actually take off. And we ended up with, about 350 members, I think, in our heyday. Yeah, it was pretty amazing. And once we finally got burned out on leading SASM and schlepping our furniture into play parties every single month, and we started really concentrating on the fetish events, we really understood that a lot of what we had seen was exclusionary. And Steve and I set out to make an event that was not exclusionary. It did not exclude transgenders, did not exclude bodies, because everybody that we had talked to about, doing an event like this, everybody wanted, well, no, do it just for straight people. I'm like, yeah, bullshit. So we set out to make that event always to include everyone. And we don't put up with homophobia, we don't put up with any crap like that. And now we're up to 4,000 members.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's been an amazing 20 years with Steve, and we look forward to 20 years more.
Rylee?
My story seems very different in some ways. The way I got into the community was kind of all by fluke. I started my first year of college, and I heard one of the people on my floor talking about this horrific book and how it was a parody of Sleeping Beauty, and then the prince ended up awakening Sleeping Beauty not by a kiss but by raping her. And I'm like, okay, it seems like one of those things everybody shied away from, so that was just something I seemed to run towards. So I got the book and I realized what that was about. I'm like, this is amazing. I have never read anything that was quite like this before. And so I investigated further. Thank God for the internet, because through that I ended up finding a pro-dom mistress in Chicago, which is where I grew up, and she actually was very kind in the way that not only did she scene and do the scenes with me and give me experiences about different fetishes, but then she would encourage me to read and encourage me to learn what was going on around me and what I was really getting into. At the time, I was a female because I'm transgender, and I had a boyfriend at the time who became my husband, and we ended up moving from Chicago down to Texas. And in the process, I had a child. I was going along the 2.5 kids, white picket fence lifestyle, and it was just not the way that I wanted my life to go, but all my fetishes were secret because he was so straight-laced. I didn't know how to explain things to him and explain what I wanted. When we moved down to Texas, though, it was like my whole security net was gone, and so then I started looking more towards, I couldn't find another pro-dom in Texas who I really felt connected to. So then I started searching out the greater community at large, and I found The Sanctuary, and I found TNG, and I found all different types of groups that I was welcome to. But at the same time, not exactly in my then husband at the time wasn't really very encouraging about my life, about those life choices. So he was like, you know, you just do your thing and then come home and then we'll just all pretend that everything's fine again. So then I ended up getting further, it seemed like I got further and further away from the 2.5 lifestyle. And I started going to more events, and I started meeting more people, and eventually I found myself at the Eagle because I wanted to experience leather, because it was one of those things where everybody was talking about leather and no one could explain it to me. They said it was something you had to experience. Within that time, I found my sir. I found my sir, and we started a relationship, and I found out how open the community was towards kind of who you wanted to be for the most part. And I started transitioning, and just seemed that everything, once I accepted what I enjoyed, like really enjoyed, and what I really was, and the type of person I really was, it just all seemed to come together. And eventually Sir and I ended up running for the IPTC title, and it just, everything just seemed to blossom and grow since then. That's all I got.
And Hardy.
I came in a long time ago in the 70s, and my first leather bar was a place called Sundance Kids in Dallas. It was a old school style leather bar, although it wasn't anything like New York, and it was not welcoming to everybody. You had to pass the doorman to get in, and I would go and sit in the parking lot and watch guys go in and out. And after about a month or so of that, I decided, okay, you can't just sit in the parking lot. This is a really boring Saturday night. Go in. So I had a leather jacket and I had Levi's, and I figured I could clear the door. And I got in with no problem, and went up to the bar and said, I'll have a martini. And the bartender looked at me and said, you want a beer? Okay. And I took a beer, and I went and stood by the wall and just kind of scoped things out. And after several weeks of going regularly and just hanging, people started talking to me because it was more closed, it wasn't open. And I had talked to the guy who ran the leather shop. There was a little leather shop downstairs in the back of the place. And he kind of clued me in on what was going on and what it was about. And eventually I got in with some people who sort of mentored me and helped me, and I ended up joining Dallas Motorcycle Club, or pledging Dallas Motorcycle Club, and getting in with some really good guys and understanding what it was all about and really getting to start playing. And then I went to New Orleans, and which, I used to go to New Orleans on a regular basis, but I'd never been to a leather bar in New Orleans, and there was a place called TT's West. Yeah, okay. It was right off Armstrong Park, and I was down there producing a show, and my choreographer was with me, and my choreographer was very much a twink, and I was, at this point, I always dressed in leather no matter what, even professionally I did. And in entertainment, which I was in at the time, nobody seemed to care. So I said, come on, you've never been to a leather bar, you need to come in. And so I decided I was going to introduce somebody else to it. And we went in, and there was like a little alcove, and you get inside, and I went up and ordered a drink, and I looked around, I couldn't find it. and I saw him pressed up against the alcove, like eyes wide, like scared, and I'm going, why would he be scared? And then I looked at the bar and I realized what he was looking at. And there was a leather man in chaps with his butt hanging out, having a martini, no less. And behind him was a guy having a beer with a paddle. He was paddling while he was talking to somebody else. And the guy with the martini in the chaps with his butt hanging out was talking to somebody else, and he was getting a blowjob from a slave under the bar. And this was like my choreographer's first introduction to leather, and to me, it seemed perfectly normal. So I guess I changed a little bit by that time, and we ended up in Jules Tavern and all that backroom stuff. So, but it wasn't necessarily a welcoming community until you got into it. But I met some really interesting people because it was a diverse crowd. There were leather women, leather dykes, and they were totally unlike any lesbians I'd ever met. And there were a lot of leather men, and there were leather men of color, which was like, in the gay community, you just didn't. There wasn't a mix. It was very segregated. Even though this is in the 70s, you shouldn't have had segregation. It was not in the leather community. It was very much together, I guess, because there was less spaces to be in. And so that's kind of how I got into it. And I've watched it change, and it really became a community, I think, and this is my opinion, when AIDS hit, because it decimated the city. Probably 80% of the people I knew died. And when you had to go to the hospital to take care of because the nurses wouldn't. Then we became a community. And the dykes came in and helped, and the leathermen came in and helped, and we became a community, and we bonded together, and the fundraising started. And that's really, I think, when it really kind of took off. Even though it was a community before, it was more of an insular community, and then it became a caring community, so it's different. Sorry, I got verklempt.
Well, I probably have one of the shorter time frames since of being out, but I kind of just consider, for me, like, 'cause I was somewhat out in college, but I kind of just consider the time that I graduated in 2010. Just the experience that I've had, I've kind of felt that the overall gay community is content in its segregation almost. It's just kind of, we're over here, they're over there, and they're over there, and everyone just kind of seems to be fine with it. And I wound up kind of stumbling into the bear community a little bit, just because those are the type of guys I tend to go for. And that was a case where they promote themselves as being something different when they're really not. And then I found the leather community where I feel like that's actually where diversity is really happening. And I'm not like, there have definitely been issues in the leather community, but I feel like the leather community is better equipped to kind of take a look in itself and say, okay, how can we fix these issues and make people feel more welcome? Like, I see those conversations happening more among leathermen than anybody else. So that's kind of been my overall experience with different aspects of the gay community. I can't say obviously from then to now, since it's only been 5 years, but I've seen progression happen just in my short time in leather versus pretty much anywhere else, and that's just in the past few years. So,
one thing I was going to say is, I joined NLA in the early '90s, or in the '90s when it started, and NLA, I began working with them. We decided that we needed to do education because that was like our strong suit. And we began doing education, and there was a conscious decision to open the door. NLA originally was going to be for gay men and lesbians only, and they had a big knockdown, drag-out meeting in Dallas in the 90s with the national group, and the decision was made we're going to be pansexual. And they sort of coined the term pansexual. And the question was, what happens if you open the door and all of a sudden we're a minority? What will happen? And the answer is, we'll deal with that when it happens. Well, we're dealing with it now, because most of the people in LA, like in LA, Dallas, are heterosexual. That's okay. I don't have a problem with it. I hear people say, where are all the gay leathermen? And it's like, well, they've been diluted because, we're like a minority of a minority in the general population. So you're not going to look as robust, so it's just natural. But what I found is that the majority of the people that have come in and are eager for the education, and they're eager for the community, and they want that. And I kind of feel, and I've always felt this way, if they want it, then they're part of it. If they'll contribute to it and work for it, then you become part of it. And the way you earn your place in the community is by working for it and doing it. You don't just show up and go, "Hi, I'm part of the community." Okay, no, you're part of the crowd, but do you want to be part of the community? And the community involves doing something. And I see that. So I think the gay-straight question, which some people look at it as a controversy, and I've talked both sides of the issue. What do you do? I think it's change, and really leather is all about change. I mean, we're radical, fringe, sexual outlaws. Well, if we're going to be an outlaw and we're resistant to change, then we're not outlaws, we're Republicans. I'm just saying. And so you can't be resistant to change. You can't be conservative. You've got to be able to change. I mean, change is the way we began. It wasn't like somebody, said, "Well, there's always been fisting, let's do that." No, somebody said, "I wonder if you could put your hand up somebody's ass," and did it and developed it. And the kind of stuff that we play, flogging and whipping, has been developed to an art form. I've heard people say that, like Hellfire Club in Chicago, they developed to a performance art. Inferno, come and look at us, come and watch us play. So I think how it's happened is we continue to grow and change. And if we resist the change, we become Civil War reenactors, and we're not going to be vibrant, and we're going to die. And that's my soapbox, and I'll get off my soapbox.
But you talk about in LA, Dallas being mostly hot, but the funny thing is there is not a lot of places outside, like as far as leather education, like that's, like gay men have the bar, and as welcoming as the Eagle is, there are times when if you're a female and you walk in there, you have a feeling that it's not your space. If you walk in there as a transgender person, like for the most part, I can talk to anybody in the bar and not have a problem. But if it gets beyond just the general chit chat of how's things going, blah, 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 what are you into when it comes to the sex portion of things, if I were to try to get in with somebody like that, it's like the door shuts down when they realize what's going on with me and my history. But there aren't a lot of places for heads, really, who want to experience the leather scene. It doesn't seem like. Although I would tell them to go out to the bar, but it seems like NLA is like this nice safe space where gay men can go outside of that. Heads kind of have that NLA, which is why I think you're seeing the difference in population there.
I think that's probably why we tried to make a difference with Temple of Flesh. We tried to make sure that everybody was welcome and everybody was going to be tolerated and accepted and welcomed. Because even when we reached out to the gay community with SASM, and I showed up at some events, some meetings and things like that. Oh my God, a woman. It's like, okay, Steve's bi, and that's great, and we'll accept that, even though he probably just can't make up his mind. But I hate that. But we were not really welcomed. We were looked down upon, and we decided, you know what, fuck them. We'll make our own events. We'll make sure that they're invited. We'll make sure that they're welcome. And it took us a long time. It took us a very long time, and it's been 20 years of work, of a lot of work, and a lot of marketing, and a lot of heart put into it, and telling people, look, this isn't an event that's just hetero. This is an event that is welcoming to everybody. And finally, just within the past 3 to 4 years, and this, 17 years of working on it, so we've really had to prove ourselves. But it took us a long time before the gay community really started coming to our events and realizing that they really, really are welcome. So I think that there's been so much, divisiveness in the community that people are used to that, and they just accept it. Just without question, they just accept it. And then they look at something like TOF that welcomes everybody and goes, yeah, right, yeah. And you know, you have to kind of prove yourself.
See, that keeps coming back to the theme. You have to prove yourself.
Yeah,
You have to prove you're there for the right reason, I guess.
exactly.
Because I think anybody can walk in, and I've talked about it before, and everybody's seen them. Sexual tourists that just kind of come in because, ooh, that's the flavor of the week, and they want to see what's happening. Well, that's okay, but they're a buzzkill if it's in like a party. You know, it's like a dungeon space. But how else are they going to find out? So
Yeah, we cater to them too.
I think there's time for that, and there's time for things that are more for, you know, serious. I used to own a dungeon in Dallas called Inquisition Dallas. I was one of the owners, and we were the first real open dungeon space. It was interesting to watch the crowd, because we had a strong contingent of leather dykes and gay men and enlightened heterosexuals, and we had pansexual parties, and the whole concentration of the entire thing was on the play. It was not on social. The social room was about the size of 2 tables. The rest of it was all play space, and the spotlight and the music and the space was leather space, and it was about play, and it worked. And the DMs would come and break up conversations in the dungeon and say, take it out. You know, you can watch, but if you're going to talk about the hockey scores, go outside. And I think that kind of stuff is important to make a safe space for leather people to play. And people, if you want to say leather BDSM, whatever, having that safe space to play and to mix and to watch each other play is what is going to change it. Because and if you don't see it, you don't know. And we fear the unknown, and by seeing something that we don't know, we learn. Like, I didn't know, I was always squeaky about cutting until I watched a couple of lesbians do a fucking gorgeous bloody cutting scene, and I was like, I get it, and I don't do DS worth shit, but I know some straight people who do DS to the nines, and they've got it down. And it's like, so when I watch those things, I say, okay, take something from that. And I think that's important that we do that, and that requires not just diversity, but it requires keeping an open mind, and that's tough.
Well, I guess exploring gender in general and how we view it. That's another thing that I've kind of brought up recently, because I've noticed for years, like, honestly, sometimes gay men can be even more misogynistic than straight men sometimes, in the way that we treat women, the way we address women, the way we, criticize how they look. We might love them one week and then they'll gain a few pounds and then we turn on them right away. So, I think that kind of plays a factor as far as how we kind of treat them like the other. I feel like there's kind of a whole mindset that goes into that. As far as I do think in certain contexts, division isn't necessarily the worst thing, but we also need to know when's the right time to be apart, when's the right time to come together. And I think we're still kind of trying to find that balance.
What's the play space thing, at events where they have segregated play space, the pan space is always busy, the women's space is always busy, and what I've noticed is the men's space is empty.
Yeah,
And it's like, so why the hell do we have to segregate if you're just not going to use it? And I feel for you, because I know ILSB does that. I know South Plains has that. They've had that issue with play space. We're going to have separate play spaces. I would be happy, and I'd go back and forth on this, with everybody playing together in one big play space. The way pansexual came about was at Living in Leather, one of the first ones back in the 90s in Portland. They had a convention center, and they had a men's dungeon and a women's dungeon, and there was a big plastic tarp down between the two, like a visqueen. And the problem was that the guys kept looking under the visqueen because they kept hearing these wonderful scenes going on the other side, and women were hearing these guys moaning and screaming, and after the third night they just took the visqueen down to hell with it and made pansexual play space. I don't understand why we can't get back to that. And maybe it's because of ego, and maybe it's because of misogyny, because I think that is really hefty. But hey, you would be able to address that because you.
I think there's still a certain amount of fear in integrating, lesbians and gay men, or even dominant females and gay men. I went to a dinner recently that was a beautiful dinner, but one person didn't want to sit at the same table with a woman because it was gay males. And, I thought about that, and it was like, okay, this person doesn't know me at all, but they're taking that situation and making a judgment call. And what if everybody did that? Everybody did that, and everybody was like that, and everybody made that kind of separation. Well, that's basically what we have and what we've been fighting. And, we've been working so hard to overcome that. And then here we have segregated dungeons. Why? To me, it just creates divisiveness. It's just, it's one more thing separating us and separating.
Part of it, though, there's a privilege thing that comes in there, and you don't realize it. And I'll argue both sides of this, but I think a lot of straight people don't understand straight privilege. And a lot of gay people don't understand gay privilege. When you're in the neighborhood, everybody's gay, right? Straight people assume everyone's straight. This is just, everybody does this. White people assume everybody's white. Even when they're around black people, they don't know that they have privilege. And I think that's something that we need to become aware of. Because without that, you can't openly figure out what's going on. And it happens. It happens to me, it happens to everybody. You look askew at something because it's not, from your standpoint, it's not what you normally assume everybody is. And I think one of the reasons that some of the clubs have had trouble with transgender is because, well, you look like a man. You act like a man. But I know you're fooling me. You're fooling me. It's a fraud or something. They don't get that gender and sex are two different things, and that's one of the things that I think is there's cisgender privilege as well, and all those things are things we need to look at, and maybe we need to throw them out there, see if they stick against the wall the same way. But I would love to see pansexual dungeons that really were pansexual dungeons. Because
Temple of Flesh is.
when people say pansexual, they mean straight. I mean, Temple of Flesh, maybe I haven't played there. I need to come play. But
You see guys
but
playing
most
there?
places, when you say pansexual, everybody thinks heterosexual.
Yeah.
And that's not the case, I wouldn't think. So I try to play whatever scene I'm playing. I play with whoever I want, and I try to do it in the space that's welcome. And I haven't had any trouble with it. And I am a very big advocate of, if you bring the heat to the dungeon will be hot. And I think a lot of people go, I don't want to play in a pan space because it's not hot, it's not sexy, it's not. Well, go in there and make it sexy.
Exactly.
Go in there and do a scene that's fucking knockout scene that you love. And the other people around you, the people that like it, it will catch fire, and it will spread, and they will all get it. There's nothing worse than going into a dungeon where there's nothing but these cold scenes with people that are not connecting with one another, and that's where people go. That's where, why aren't there any people? Why aren't there gay people here? They're used to coming to a dungeon where there's like people fucking. Well, you can't fuck in some dungeons, okay, but you can still have sex without fucking. Sex isn't fucking. Sex is in your head. It's in your eros. It's in your body. It's in the way you treat each other. And if you can have a hot scene, everybody gets better. I think all the what do they say? Rising tide lifts all boats. I think in that case it does. So that was my end of my sermon. I'm sorry.
I agree.
But that was fun when the one dungeon that we went into and we played, and I kept telling him, like, don't leave me, because it was bio male only dungeon. I said, just don't leave me. I want to play in this dungeon because I like the energy of an all male dungeon. I'm like, but just don't leave me there. And you said, don't worry about it. No one's gonna know. Why would they know? And that's just a fear, and that's what it is. It's a fear. It was a fear of getting found out. It was a fear of being ostracized. It was a fear of getting kicked out. It was this huge amount of fear for me that just went around it. And that is the only reason I can see the differentiation of play spaces, because what if I want to try this for the first time, but I want to be around other people who are transgender, and let that so I can, like, if I didn't have top surgery at that point, where things didn't line up on my body like how I wanted to see it. And I found, because I didn't find my body very attractive at the time at all pre-surgery, but I wanted to be in a space where everybody kind of knew and was okay with that. But I can see that, like, if I would have been brought into a pansexual dungeon, if that was my only option to play in a pansexual dungeon, how that could have started more conversations, and how, if I saw that I was accepted just as a whole, no matter where I was, that it would have been a lot better in the long run.
The only comment you got was, or I got, was somebody came over and said, "Who's the hot boy?"
Boy, right.
And it's like,
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm like.
I said, "Oh, just a friend."
When we were planning ILSB last year, and we had the discussion about play spaces, there was the whole, okay, well, we need a play space for this group, this group, this group. Okay, well, first of all, you're no.
We can't divide it
I
that
can't
much.
afford that many play spaces. I mean, we have to have a puppy play space, and only a puppy play space. And we need a transgender play space, and only a transgender play space. And for the straight people. And for, good Lord, I mean, we only had 2 buses. And I finally said, okay, this is how we're going to handle it. We're going to do, the pricing is all inclusive for ILSB, and it includes the play party. 1 play party on Saturday night after the contest. That's it. We had more people get on one of the 2 buses, go to the play space with nothing. I mean, none of their play bags, nothing. They just, well, we're just going to go check it out, because we're just going to prove to everyone that you have had to have 32 different play spaces. And I sat there and watched people come in, and there was the social area. And then they'd go to the back space. And then they were literally running back to the bus, getting on the bus, going back to the hotel, and 30 minutes later showing up with their play bag and running back to the play space. Because they realized hot is hot, period. And they were like, oh my God, I just saw the best scene. I'm sorry, the gayest man I know, who just swore, I will never play with anyone else in the room unless they are bio-born, gay-identified men. And he comes up, I just saw the hottest scene between a female and a transgender guy. And I thought, well, there are 2 words I thought I'd never ever thought I'd hear from you. And he was back getting his play bag, and he was headed back to the play space. 180 people went through the play space. And that was probably the biggest hit of the weekend, other than the stairwells at the hotel. Well,
Story there.
lots of stories there. I don't think we can discuss it. We're being filmed. But
Please do.
a lot of diversity up in the stairwell. But we affected change by doing one thing and saying we're only doing it this way, because if we don't give them the exposure, they may never get it. Because if we had set up 32 different play spaces, everyone just would have gone to their comfort level. Sorry. And I hate to say it, we forced everyone to go to the same party. And everyone loved it. Change was effective. And yes, by the way, it was, who was it? Ruin had a rope scene with someone. And it was right when you walked in. There she was. And it was hotter than hell. But we affected change. So this year, when the decision came, okay, we're planning the weekend, what are we doing? We're having one play party on Saturday night after the contest, and the price is included. Don't even give them an option. Sometimes you just gotta kick people into it. And it worked.
Well, I think Hardy mentioned something earlier about privilege, and I think that there are aspects where we do, as gay men, we definitely have privilege that a bisexual person may not have, because it's something familiar. When you're gay, it's like, okay, you know what you are. Whereas someone who is bisexual is like, they're kind of, because it's something different, it's kind of like it's easier to kind of other that person. Like, okay, you're different from me, so you're kind of over there. So I think as a gay person who kind of has that level of privileges, you kind of have to be able to speak up and say, no, if that person says they're bisexual and they like both, and just shut the fuck up. And that's just kind of really, that's kind of what it comes down to. And I feel like anytime you're in a position of privilege, it's kind of, you almost have a responsibility to speak up for anyone who might not have that privilege in any situation. I mean, even to take it back to race, I like it when white people bring up issues of white privilege, because more white people are more likely to listen to other white people in those conversations. If I bring up something about it, then it's just another black person bitching about racism. Whereas if a white person does it, they're like, oh, well, maybe it is something that we need to talk about. So I kind of see bisexuality in that same way. Like, if I see someone talking judgmentally about it, then I kind of have to step in and say, no, they're bisexual, they like both, and it's really just, either play with them or mind your business and go somewhere else. That's kind of my attitude about it.
I always think about the Kinsey scale. I know Kinsey did a lot of research and a lot of it's been disputed, but the idea of a 1 to 6 on the Kinsey scale, and 1 being, I don't remember how it goes, 1 being completely heterosexual, no homosexual experience, and 6 being completely homosexual, no heterosexual experience. And there are very few Kinsey 6s and very few Kinsey 1s. It's always in between. And it's a spectrum. So I identify as a gay man, but I play with women, I play with men. Affectionally, I relate to men. But sexually, I can understand relating to women just fine. If you were in the workshop the other day, you know that. But I think personally, I think everyone's bisexual. We just don't want to. We're one end of the scale or the other. But it's hard to identify that way. Everybody wants a flag, and so we're going to plant the flag. So we're going to use the pink and blue flag, and that's going to be bisexual. And that's fine, but I think we need to recognize it. If they want to identify that way, we need to recognize it and honor that, because people have a need to feel respected, and they don't want to feel less than, and they don't want to feel other. And I think we need to be able to honor that and say, that's great, and celebrate it, instead of what I used to always think is, well, they just haven't made a choice. They're just not there yet. Whatever there is, they're just experimenting. It's like looking at kids. I understand from the research that your gender is pretty much figured out by the time you're like 5?
3 or 4.
3 or 4.
3 or 4.
So the idea that, at 3 or 4 they're dressing up like girls, it's just a phase. No, they probably really feel like female. But society pushes them away from that. And then they have to spend the rest of their life in therapy and rediscovering the fact that at 3 or 4 they were actually female, and we just didn't recognize it, and we took it away from them. And I think the same thing with bisexuality. There are people that are firmly identified as bisexual. I've got several friends who are, and they're married, but they're both bisexual. Man and woman are both bisexual. And it's not just that they're opportunists, although they are opportunists. I'm just saying that. I think it is genuinely their orientation, and we are stuck in a binary, and the world is not binary. And I think if we could ever get over that, then the planet would be better. Everything is not black and white. There are no people that are I'm assuming, and I don't know, with the exception of perhaps in Africa, there are no African Americans that have no mixed heritage. There are no white people that don't have mixed heritage from someplace in Europe, wherever. They're just not. And we can do the same thing with sexuality. I don't think everybody is exclusive. I know straight people, straight women that love to watch gay porn. How many straight women in here like to watch gay porn? Any straight women? Okay, see? So why is that? You're straight. Why would you want to watch gay porn? Well, because there's part of you that likes that energy. And I think the same thing is true for straight men that like to watch lesbian porn and gay men that watch straight porn. Okay, I watch straight porn because the lighting's better. You know, and there's not as much concentration on the plumbing. But I think that's something that we need to really open up about. And you know, I don't identify as bisexual, but I'll cop to the fact that I'm not a 6. No way. I'm not a Kinsey 6.
One size does not fit all. I think you know, a lot of people just now we have gays, we have heteros, we have you know, transsexuals, we have transgender, we have all of these categories, and you know, bi just does not fit into a category very well because people really honestly think that they haven't made up their minds. And I like to think of it more as, yes, we are opportunists. We're smarter than everybody. We just, you know.
I'm just greedy.
Yeah, exactly. We take it where we can get it and where we want it. And, you know, and screw anybody that doesn't, you know, that doesn't think that we haven't made up our minds. We
Or
have
just
made up
screw
our
anybody,
minds.
so no.
Well, exactly.
Sorry.
Exactly.
I laugh sometimes because my sir is female, biologically female, but I love men. But I don't consider myself bisexual. I consider myself queer because as long as my energy plays right with a particular person, I don't care what plumbing you got. We'll figure it out. That's part of the fun. We'll just, you know, as long as we mesh up real well, let's find a way to make it work. But I remember when I was getting married to my ex, and I had come out to my brother as bisexual. I don't know why. I really didn't have to, but... And he's like, well, how can you get married if you're identifying this way? Aren't you gonna be married to this person but consistently look at other people? I'm like, yeah, I can appreciate it. It'll be awesome. You didn't get it? That's okay. But I've never really had a lot of people in the community approach me about that. They're more confused when I say, well, no, I love men. And they're like, well, I thought you were straight. No, you have been sadly misinformed. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, when it comes to racial diversity, I will say, I think as far as Onyx goes, I think it's just a matter of where you're looking. Like, sometimes in Chicago, they do tend to kind of be in themselves, but I think that might also be more of an organization issue as well. But, I mean, when you go to events like IML or MAL, they definitely kind of, they intertwine themselves pretty well with the overall event, and they definitely welcome everyone. But sometimes it's just, you know, you can put it out there, and only, you know, if people want to show up, they want to show up, and that's what it comes down to sometimes. As far as like the overall community, it's funny talking, because I like talking to people of color who have been in the community for a long time so they can kind of relate their experience from then to now. They definitely have said that the gay community overall really hasn't evolved that much over the, you know, from when they were younger in the community to now. It was segregated then, it's still segregated now, and it doesn't really seem like, it seems like the gay community is kind of content with its, you know, separation, whereas you know, they've noticed that the leather aspect of the community has been kind of evolving itself over the years, and I do think that organizations like Onyx have actually helped with that because they're bringing more people of color into the fold. I mean, I was at a fireside chat with Mufasa, one of the founders of Onyx, a couple of weeks ago, and one of the things he was saying was that they had, like, the bulk of their new members that are coming in are all like 20-somethings, young guys. So, I mean, we've talked about, you know, how there's kind of an issue of how do we get more young people into the community. Well, Onyx has found a good way to do that with their social media presence, with the way that they've kind of presented themselves to make kink. It seems like something that's fun that someone will want to explore and learn more about. So, you know, they're bringing more people into the community, and it's helping kind of. I'm seeing a lot, like when you look at pictures and stuff from events, it's looking more and more diverse as you look at more recent pictures versus, you know, older pictures. And even in some of the older pictures, it was still, the diversity was there. So I think that, you know, progress is happening over time, and I think it's just one of those things where we might have to just kind of look back. We might, you know, look 10 years down the line and look back, and we may see, we might even, it's one of those things you might not even notice the progress is happening while it's happening. You just kind of have to look back and see, yeah, we have come a long way from that. I don't really see much progress happening in the overall gay community. That's why I kind of have separated myself from certain aspects, because I've made attempts to get conversations going, or made attempts to try and improve a situation, but it seems like when you're content in being separated, then you just kind of know, okay, I'm just gonna leave them over there. Whereas over here, you know, in this situation, I feel like there's actually like people who really want to be more welcoming and diverse. So I'm more willing to bring up issues in that space, like we're doing right now. So yeah, I think it's definitely a lot of progress that's happening, and I think we'll continue to see it over time.
Just think, before social media came along,
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been tons of change in all sorts of areas, not just race, but, you know, in bringing in gay people and you know, actually having conversations and being able to talk about different things. Because, you know, 20 years ago there was no internet. How'd you talk then? You know, how did you bring up things that, you know, that were important to different sides of the community and different aspects of the community and different groups? You know, and I think that that honestly the coming of the internet did so much to, you know, to open up our communication with these different groups. And you know, we'll look back at it, like you said, 30 years from now and say, wow, we were really cavemen back then. So yeah, the internet that's the thing that that I think really brings people together when it's used properly.
I think the thing about Onyx is good, that it recognizes there's a different culture,
Mm-hmm.
and it gives people a place to feel comfortable in that culture. Just like gay groups, you know, there is a gay culture, believe it or not, and there's you know, I think those are important to maintain the identity, but I also think that it's important to look at it from the standpoint of how do you define that identity, and those are discussions we're going to be having for a long time, because especially race. If we as a country can't figure it out, you know, at least as a community we can start it, you know. And we're going to probably get, you know, from a standpoint of communication, people in kink and leather communicate more sexually than the muggles, okay? And if everyone would use the kind of communication we use in negotiation and when we play and feedback and all that, there'd be less divorces, there'd be happier sex lives, there'd be probably less wars. I mean, it could really change the world. And I'm not saying that as a joke, I'm serious. Because those are the kind of things that cause separation. And I'm not saying kumbaya, we all just need to get together, which we do, but I think we can start that. Like you were talking about, Jeffrey was talking about starting a conversation. That's exactly what we need. And race, we don't talk about it. We do not talk about it. We don't talk about the fact that there are only a handful of Asian people that I see in the scene. We were talking about this last night, in fact. And I never even think about that. And it's like, and Indian, I have not seen anybody from India in the scene at all. And why? It may be culturally it just doesn't work, or they feel excluded and they're not going to come out. I don't know. But if we're going to open the door, somebody's got to be brave and be the first one in the door. And once that happens, then we need to talk about it. So yeah, talking about it helps. And some of the Onyx people are some of my favorite people.
Yeah, I think Onyx is generally really welcoming to. I think they're really welcoming to women, and I mean, even if you're not a person of color, I think they're very welcoming in a lot of their socials. You see a lot of women go in and talk to them, and they're very respectful, and you know, they treat them, at least from what I've seen, they treat them like anyone else, like they treat anybody else. So yeah, that's my general opinion of that group.
I've always been of the belief that there's knowing and there's experiencing. And and they're two separate things. And knowing, yes, we can have the discussions, we can have the conversations, and you, as a person of color, can share with me where you're coming from. I'll never experience, no matter how many men of color I sleep with, I will never experience being an African American. I will never experiencing personally being transgender or being a woman. I may know a lot about it, but I'll never actually experience it. What I think now, though, in order to change, I think that it goes to your question, how do we actually change it? Or how can we move that direction even more than we have, is exposure. We have to increase the exposure like you're doing with the group that you have. You know, if you increase that exposure, and I'm going to events and I'm going to play parties where transgender individuals are there, where people of color are there, where women are there, then I realize that it's not so scary. Because that's as close to experiencing as I'm going to get. Because I'm not a woman, I'm not transgender. And yes, I've slept with all of them. I'm currently working on Portuguese. You know, but I will still never be Brazilian. You know, but knowing that, I think in order to affect change and to affect understanding of diversity, we have to expose everybody to these different segments of our community that sometimes they really are just segments that we as a community have put, you're over here and you're over here and you're over here. You know, we always joke at the Dallas Eagle with Michael Dane. We always joke with him. We have a one Asian rule at the Dallas Eagle. You know, when he's not coming in, like he was away this weekend, he has to send in at least one other Asian to the Dallas Eagle, so we have quota. You know, we say that as a joke, but at the same time, we are looking at the fact that where is the Asian population? Why aren't they coming out? You know, and a lot of us just know Michael Day. You know, okay, how can we increase that exposure? You know, and I think that's our next big step as a community. How do we increase that exposure? Because once we do that, like what you're doing, and by the way, kudos, that's going to affect more change. That's going to allow people to understand what diversity truly is.
Okay. Everybody, this is the Alamo City Leather and Fetish Weekend Panel Discussion. Thank you guys.